It's time to start part 5 of the build of the Dancing Feather pilot schooner. And in this section of the videos, we're going to be building out the covering boards or waterways, and we'll be working on the deck planking as well. At this point, we've begun the construction of the covering boards or waterways. We brought them into the width you see here, and they flow into the piece that we've made out of a piece of styrene and some mat board. And once we've started here to fill in between the frames with what would be again covering board waterway, and we'll have to work our way up and do all those going up through. And when we do, we'll sand that off and it should become flush on the outside. So at that point, some point along there, we'll be coming outside and putting another piece on to widen the waterways out to where the planking will be, the surface of the planking. And then once we get the planking on, there's going to be one more layer on top of this one that will stick out beyond the planking, and it will look like a piece of molding. To get this around here, we're going to have to soak the wood and bring it around, mold it to come around. If we soak it in water and a little bit of ammonia, that'll usually soften the wood to the point where we can bring it on around. Anyhow, that's what we're going to be working on. One more thing we're going to be addressing here is to taper the frames into the edge of the covering board as we go aft. You can see I've already done that on this side. On this side we haven't. The deck beams are still proud coming back through here. And the way I've been addressing that is to use a Dremel tool with a sanding bit in it, as you see here, and work it just a little at a time. So the rest of that we can bring down by hand. But next we'll start on the waterways. I've been cutting these pieces to put in between the frames, extending the waterways to the outside of the frames. And the way I've been doing that is I've cut a piece, it's the same thickness as the waterway that's already in there, and I've cut it to 7/32 width because that's slightly larger than the distance from the waterway to the outside, and I can sand that down like I have here until that becomes flush to the frames. So to cut it to length, I stick one in here, mark the length of it, and then I move over to here, and I cut it in my little miter box. And then we take that back over here and we try to position it in place for trial fit. And now it wants a bit of a taper to it. So that's where we do this. Get a bit of a taper on it. And that doesn't look like too bad a fit. So we'll glue that in place. At this point on the, I'd finished filling in between the frames on the port side. And we're about to start working on the starboard side to do the same thing. I started off cutting these little pieces using the miter saw. But as I got into it, I found it was much easier to just nip them off with the cutters that I have and mark the lines and cut it with the cutters. So that's the next step, is get the starboard side done. I've got the rest of the waterways between the frames, and I've added a piece here, the thickness of the planking that's going to go over the bulkheads and on there. So the planking will come out even to this edge. There's a little mismatch here and there, but with a little bit of filler and filing, I think we can smooth that all out. And the next thing I want to do is to create a form that will allow me to mold the bulwarks at the stern of the boat. So over here, I have a big block of balsa wood, which I've cut a piece off of. And then from that piece, I cut this piece. And from that, I'm going to cut the outline of the upper part of the bulwarks. And then we'll shape over the thickness of that down to where it meets the waterways. So that's the next process. First thing I got to do is glue this pattern onto that piece of wood. I had a piece of scrap balsa that I was able to cut this out of, and I've glued a pattern on this side that is the edge of the waterline, and on this side I've glued the full pattern that has the outline of the top of the bulwarks. So the next job is going to be to cut out the line to the upper bulwarks and then shave that down until it meets the edge of the waterline. I cut proud of the line. Now we'll take it over on the disc sander and take it down to the line. Now I got to figure out how to fare the two into each other. Also, wood is pretty soft. It sands pretty easily and even may take some time. I'm going to use the sandpaper to bring the bottom line up to the top line. Well, it looks like it might work out if I work at it a little bit. I've sanded the shape of the stern, the bulwarks at the stern. This being the waterline edge and this being the top of the bulwarks. I've sanded the taper into it. Now we can start to visualize what the stern is going to look like. Now we have to figure out how we're going to mold a material around that to produce a thin bulwarks. I think the first thing we want to do is try to make a paper pattern. I've rubber cemented a piece of paper to the mold that I made of the stern bulwarks, and the idea is that we're going to use this to make a template from which I should be able to use that template on something like thin styrene or something like that that I may be able to laminate over the form. It's an idea anyhow, we'll see how it works. I've rubbed a pencil along the edge of the mold, and that should define my pattern, which means I should be able to peel this off, cut it out with a pair of scissors, and have a pretty reasonable, accurate pattern to place over the mold. Here's what the pattern looks like in the flat. So now we're going to cut that out and then trace it onto a piece of styrene and see if we can mold the styrene to the shape of the bulwark. I've cut away a bit of the mold so that I can get some clamps on it to hold the sheets of styrene. The idea is to laminate 3 layers, 3, maybe 4 layers of styrene together to form a shape of the bulwarks. So I need to be able to clamp at least part of it on there. I don't know if I'll be able to get any clamps on here, but we'll give it a try. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. Anyhow, it's a start. I've rubber cemented the pattern onto a piece of styrene. So the next thing to do is get that cut out and see how it fits onto the mold. And if it fits properly, I'll use that as a template to make at least 2 others. Using the first styrene that I cut out as a template, I've marked 3 others on a sheet. And I've also marked them port and starboard because for some reason they're not perfectly symmetrical. And I want to make sure I have them oriented right when I laminate them. Well, now I know why it appeared so asymmetrical. For some reason, when I cut the template out, I cut the starboard side short by this much. So when I put it onto the when I put it over the mold, I come up short. No wonder it looks asymmetrical. It is asymmetrical. So I flipped the template over and extended the piece on this side, and I'm going to cut out a piece of styrene and see how that works. Well, that worked out a little better. Now we have a full length of plastic going over the entire mold, and looks like something we ought to be able to work with. So this now becomes my new template, to which I will cut out 3 more. The first planks on will be known as the king planks, and they're wider than the rest of the planks on the deck. And I've chosen 1/4 inch wide king planks, and the reason for that is the mast on this boat will be 1/4 inch mast, and I want the hole for the mast to be able to be contained within the width of the 2 king planks. So those will be the first planks we put on the deck, and they'll be taking a pencil and running a pencil down along this one side of each plank to represent the fact that the planks would have been caulked when they're put on the deck, and after they're caulked, the seams of caulking are sealed with a black pitch, and that black pitch would be slightly visible on the deck, so all the decks will have a piece of pencil line rubbed down along the side of them to give the impression of pitch. Well, we've got the king planks in, and I've ripped down some of the deck planks. I made them 1/8 inch, and I've cut the tip off because what happens is when you taper these things in like this, they become very fragile on the end. So the technique by boat builders is to is to cut the end off of it where it would be fragile, and then nib that into the to the deck, as you see here. I'm going to have to put the camera down to get that in flush. Alright, I'm going to try to capture how I go about cutting this in. I have these chisels that I made from old drill bits. I don't know if we can see this well or not, but it's an old drill bit, and I've ground it to a sharp point, and it becomes a nice tiny chisel. And I'm going to use that to mark the flat on the waterway. And then I'm going to use it to cut down the side of it to mark it on the waterway that way. So now I go in and cut the flat spot a little bit. And then I take a regular size chisel and come in and take a slice. Now that we've done that, we can do a trial fit. And that's it's not too bad. I don't know how well that shows or not, but we'll zoom in a little bit here. So that's how I'll go about that. I talked about using a pencil to simulate pitch in the caulking on the deck, and this is all there is to that. I just rub the pencil down the side. I know I said one side, and usually I do one side, but it doesn't hurt to do both sides. That's all there is to that. The deck planking is now completed, and we've managed to nib in all the planks on this end, and then when we come down on this end, we started nibbing in to the cover boards at the stern. Speaking of the cover boards, I've discovered that I've been using the term coverboard and waterway interchangeably. And one of our club members who's very knowledgeable on this, Rob Napier, is kind enough to point out to me that there is a difference between the construction of a boat that has a waterway and a boat that has a coverboard. And I'm not going to go into that right at the moment, but the construction that we're doing here is actually technically a coverboard, not a waterway. At this point, I'm going to sand the planking flush to each other and sand along the coverboard. And I'm going to start off with 120 grit to try and take it down a little faster, and then we'll finish up with a 220 and a 400. At that point, we'll give this whole thing a coat of poly and see what that looks like. When you have all these little bits and pieces between the frames and whatnot, it's very difficult to get them all to fair flush to each other. So I'm using this material. It's a little balsa wood filler, and you can see I've applied it here, and I'll sand that all down and get rid of any low spots. I can't do this side yet because I haven't glued the strip on the outside of the covering board. And we got to bend the strip around the stern, and I've got a piece of wood that I'm going to cut to the shape of the stern, and we're going to use that as a mold to pre-bend a soaked piece of wood around, and we'll see how that works. I have filled a pan with water, and I looked all over, but I couldn't find my ammonia. I used to have a small bottle of ammonia around, which I would add some to the water to help break down the resin in the wood, but don't have any, so I'm going to try it with just water. So we'll let this soak for quite a while and see if we can't bend that. This is a fixture I made that I'm going to use to try to bend the wood around, and hopefully I find a way to clamp that in place. And I've run the fixture through the saw so that I can get a couple of clamps on to hold the ends when we try to bend the wood around on that. It looks like the water without ammonia in it has been enough to allow me to bend this piece of wood around the form. So we'll let that dry and see if it maintains its shape. At this point, I've completed the covering boards out to the full thickness of the planking, which will leave one more layer of covering boards to go on outside of this to act as a trim, come beyond the planking at some point. But first I want to put planking on and sand it all smooth to the planks. It has a coat of wipe-on poly. Some of the filler that I've used is visible, but that's only on the covering boards, which are going to be painted white, so you're not going to see the filler. And at this point, the pencil lines on the edge of the planks becomes apparent, and it does appear as a pitch. I used to go in and make marks where the planks would have ended, and I also put in pin pricks for fasteners on the deck and that sort of thing. But in talking to some of the folks at the Environmental Ship Club, in the real world, the fasteners would have been plugged on the deck, and you would not see them in this scale. So I'm not bothering to put any fasteners in, and I'm not going to try to simulate planks that don't run full length of the boat, but I think this will look pretty decent. While the finish is drying on the decking for the second coat of poly, I started to work on the bowsprit, and I've cut out cherry fitting for here and up here to support the jib boom. And the bowsprit is important on this because it has a rabbet cut into it, which is going to take the planking from the bulwarks and receive it into the bowsprit. So that's an interesting construction. I have 2 coats of the wipe-on poly on the decks at this point, and fashioned the bowsprit and the jib boom. And at this point, it's time to paint the covering boards, because I want to get a coat of paint on the covering boards before we start to plank the bulwarks. So over here I've got a box of paints that I've collected over the years. Mostly I buy these waterborne enamels. Deco Art is a brand that's carried by Michael's Art Supply. This is a buttermilk, which is an off-white, and that's what I'll be intending to paint the covering boards. The hull will be painted with the black, probably this one, lamp black, which is a flat black. And then for the bottom paint, probably be using the woodland green as bottom paint color. Either that, or I'll go with maybe a brick red for bottom paint. I'll have to make up my mind on that. But for now, we'll start off using the buttermilk on the covering boards. The covering boards and the cap rail will be painted with that, and also the base of the jib will get painted the same color. I've selected a couple of brushes. We're going to need the fine one to get in around the nib work on the deck to keep it as crisp as I can. And we're going to open up the jar here, see what kind of condition this is in. Well, it's still liquid, but over time the water separates a little bit, so I always stir it up a bit. Then I'll pour a little of this out into a cup. The reason I do that is I find that if I dip the brush directly in here, I end up getting paint above the bristles where I really don't want it. So I put a little in the cup, and that way I can try and keep it so the paint is just on the bristles. I think we'll start off giving the base of the jib a coat. And we'll set that aside. This is going to probably take 2 coats before we're done. Anyhow, that's going to keep me busy for a while. At this point, the covering boards have a single coat of the buttermilk cream. The bowsprit has actually got 2 coats of the buttermilk cream on it, so that one's probably finished as far as the painting goes. And you can see the nibbing detail comes out rather nicely. So the next step is going to be in gluing the bowsprit in place, securing the styrene bulwarks at the stern in place, and then we'll start planking the bulwarks. And that'll be a good thing to address in part 6, I think. This would be a good place to end part 5.